And I'm Jan De Silva, the program manager of New Bedford Whaling National Historical Park. And I'm here with Dr. Laura Pires Hester, who is a anthropologist and a former commissioner for the Schooner Ernestina Commission, historian of Ernestina, and here to answer some questions on the history of the Ernestina. So welcome, Dr. Pires Hester. And my first question would be, what's your history connection to Ernestina Morrissey?
Thank you, Jan. It's good to be here with you. First of all, I know that Pires is the way you hear the name, even in my family. However, I've always pronounced it Pires, which is actually closer to the Portuguese word. And the word, by the way, means saucer, just for your information.
I'm actually happy to hear you say that because that's how Julius pronounced it. So I didn't want to take a chance. He says Laura Pires Hester.
That's fine. That's fine. Okay, so my own personal connection with Schooner Ernestina Morrissey was actually in 1974. Now, as a young Cape Verdean American growing up in Massachusetts in particular, of course, I knew about these schooners that go back, 2 centuries at least. And I knew about them bringing people and cargo back and forth. And of course, they came very often to New Bedford or Providence. So I knew the stories of people going and picking up, not only meeting people coming over, but also bidons, the barrels of food, bidons, including from within my family. And I also knew that my own father had come over in the early 1900s on a similar ship. I haven't yet been able to confirm the actual name of the ship he came on, and I've checked it in the New Bedford Library and other lists of people, including Marilyn, what's her last name? Marilyn Coulter's book, because she has a list of names of people and schooners in her book. And also, in addition to my own father, of course, my mother's parents had come over prior to that. As a matter of fact, when my father came, he went to board with the home in New Bedford where my maternal grandparents were. So I hadn't yet seen the actual Ernestina. However, in 1974, I attended a conference in Providence. It was organized by Virginia Gonsalves and Yvonne Smart, the Cape Verdean American Federation. They had an annual convention. And I met there Michael Platzer. Now, Michael Platzer is not Cape Verdean American. However, his own background is from Austria. But he had been, he was at that time the program officer of the United Nations in New York. And he was doing a workshop at this conference on the Ernestina. He had become interested in it because part of his responsibility at United Nations was program officer for Cabo Verde before it became independent. And he learned about the ship, and he had also been in touch with a number of people from the Philadelphia area who had been looking for years for the FEM Morrissey. They didn't know where Morrissey was. And that was a yacht and sailing group, different from the Cape Verdean American diaspora that was and is connected to the ship. So he had begun talking to a number of different people, not only here, but also in Cabo Verde, since he was there often in his responsibility at the UN. And he wanted to bring this to the attention of the Cape Verdean community. And of course, this annual convention was a great way to do that. And since I was coming from New York and I introduced myself to him, that became the beginning of a very long relationship, which is continued to this day, although he's overseas. So since I was in New York and he was about to make a trip overseas, so we met in New York and he gave me certain papers about the Ernestina and what he was trying to do. And that became the beginning of a movement, although the movement didn't become official until after the independence of Cabo Verde. So in 1975, which, as you know, is when Cabo Verde became independent, Michael continued to have a relationship there. And these two groups from Philadelphia and the New England area related to the FEMRC and the Ernestina began to talk to each other. And of course, everyone realized that this was one and the same ship, that the FEMRC had been sold to Enrique Mendes when it was kind of given up given up actually at the bottom of the ocean. And then the people related to the Morrissey outfitted her and tried to use her as a yacht passenger ship. That didn't work very well. So it was literally given up. And Enrique Mendes and his sister purchased it in the late 70s, mid 70s. So it was, and she had stopped as the Ernestina. He purchased it much earlier than that because it made several trips back and forth to and from Cabo Verde, and had stopped before the independence of Cabo Verde. So again, Michael, as a person, became very important in kind of orchestrating this connection at the present, in the 1970s and early 80s, between Cabo Verde and the US related to the Ernestina. And that fed into an interest of both groups in returning her to her home where she was constructed outside Gloucester in 1894. So in order to do that, of course, we needed money. Cabo Verde needed to repair her while she was there. And Cabo Verde, the new President Aristide Pereira, agreed that it would be good for her to participate in the 1976 op sale. So there was a whole lot of activity related to getting her ready to make that transatlantic voyage, which would be several years after she had made her last transatlantic voyage. And as you know, that voyage did not go well. She was dismasted a few miles off of Cabo Verde and had to return. Fortunately, no one was hurt or injured. And that precipitated the setting up of our National Friends of Ernestina Morrissey in conjunction with the National Maritime Historical Association, National Historical Society in New York. And so more people began to be interested in returning her, in her being returned, and then also being repatriated. When she was coming to Opsail, she was coming as a representative of Cabo Verde. However, the discussion turned to her not only returning, but also becoming repatriated. And in order to do that, the president, again, they had agreed that the Ernestina would be given as a gift to the people of the United States. And that meant that we also had to set up a structure to accept her. When you have international gifts, they can land in the basement of the Department of Commerce. So, and that, of course, wouldn't be good for the Ernestina. So Tom Lopes, whose name I'm sure you know, who was then the first Cape Verdean representative at the Massachusetts House of Reps. He took on this role of advocating for the state to set up a commission that would take title to the ship when she returned. The human part of that story, also the background, is also that we had to the friends of Ernestina, we had a lot of discussion about, well, where should she go? I mean, yes, they had made the decision in Cabo Verde that she could come as a gift to the people of the United States. But what did that mean? Where should she come? What would be the best place? And there were several options looked at. Providence, for example, even Philadelphia, because we still had the group in Philadelphia that was very interested in her repatriation. And because of Tommy Lope's work with his colleagues and building up the interest within the New Bedford community, that made sense. So he was able to get the Massachusetts legislature to pass this legislation that created this commission. So in a sense, Massachusetts received it as kind of a steward for the people of the United States. And that's one thing I think we need to keep remembering, that it sits in Massachusetts now, and Massachusetts has done a lot in terms of the both public and private support. So it deserves, the recognition and honor of being the primary steward of the ship. But the original gift was to the people of the United States to recognize the long-standing ties between Cabo Verde and the U.S., which go back 3 centuries. As you know, there was a consular office in Cabo Verde going back to, was it 1815? So it's not just the Cape Verdeans or just the Cape Verdean Americans, but it's this very long historic connection. And as you know, Cabo Verde has always maintained in the world system a kind of neutral political state. It's part of the African hemisphere, but it also has been very open. And that's probably because partly of its where it's located. It has to be pretty open, even though it's gotten its independence, of course, was not supported by financially by the United States or by the West, but by African and even the Russian connection. So, but it has always been able to maintain a relationship, says that we are related and we're friends with the rest of the world. So we set up the, we had the Massachusetts set up the commission, and Cabo Verde was at work in repairing. So, and we had set up the National Friends. So we began to raise funds. We supported a shipwright over there. I was just looking back at our reports. We supported a shipwright and his family for about 14 months in Cabo Verde. And we had a volunteer person, John Brayman, who spent a lot of time there with his wife. So a lot of people have been a part of this history. A lot of people coming from many different groups and constituencies. One of the things about Ernestina Morrison is that she has always crossed boundaries in her early history, as you know, going up to the Arctic and the fishing, Grand Banks, etc., and then Cabo Verde back and forth, and then also making the trips between the islands and the west coast of Africa. So she has always been open to all people, all cultures, and I think that that's something that I am and hopeful that will continue in her future. So after about 6 years of doing the repair work, she was ready to make the trip. And as you know, we were able to have a half Cape Verdean from the islands and half US, and to make up the crew. And within that crew, there was a young Cape Verdean from New Bedford, Norman Gomes, who was himself was a seaman, and also a woman from New York, Peggy Lyons. She has now died. So it was a very diverse crew. And Michael Platz's brother was also a part of the crew. So there were lots of stories involved in their being there as well. We had to get the sails from Lisbon to Cabo Verde, and they had to go over to the Guinea-Bissau, the forests of Guinea-Bissau, to bring the kind of masts that were necessary. So it was a very adventurous trip. And then when they left in 1982, of course, that took a longer than hoped for time, because they were coming without an engine. We had worked with, and we had negotiated with Cummins Engine to actually provide a new engine, but we couldn't figure out how to get the engine to Cabo Verde. So the engine actually sat on the dock in Gloucester for almost a year. As a matter of fact, sometime during that year, I had a trip. I was going to make a trip to Smith College in Massachusetts, my alma mater, and Julius was working. I think he was not in Boston at that time, but he was near to Northampton. So he picked me up. We drove to Boston to see the engine, and also by that time the ship had come over, so we went, at night to make sure they were still there. But there were people on ships nearby that were actually taking care of both while she was there. I mean, that's the kind of example of the people story behind the Ernestina Morrissey story. So at that point, we had the commission in place, and Julius and July Gonsalves were part of the first commission. And we had the Friends, the National Friends, and several groups in Wareham. Julius's mother was very active in Providence. We had a small group in Boston, Philadelphia, New York. So we started having fundraising events and continuing to support the what needed to be done with the ship. I think we have to really thank Tommy Lopes, the late Tom Lopes, for his work, because this has always been, even though we have public funds, you know, both from the city and from the state, and that's a blessing, because as volunteers or privately, we would not be able to maintain a wooden ship I mean, that's really um, not possible and not probable. So we had to have specific ongoing kind of governmental support. And I'm not sure we would get that today, by the way. I think that would be super, super challenging to be able to get that. So we were very blessed to be able to um, organize and get so many different people to say yes to the various pieces that needed to be put together. Um, so when she came, however, she had to be Coast Guard certified, and that took years, and she wasn't ready to just start using, and we didn't have the certification to use her. So that took a while, and I continued to be active with the National Friends. And then in 2006, as you know, became a member of the commission until 2014. And we just worked to keep the momentum going. I have to say that it was more challenging when the Ernestina had to be taken into shipyard, say in Maine, to be retrofitted, because out of sight, out of mind. And when we would have those meetings, I think you sat in some of those meetings, you know, we had to remind people that we had to keep reminding the public and New Bedford. And of course, in New Bedford, you have changing mayors very frequently. So that meant another, getting people to know about her, et cetera, and getting more people from New Bedford on the commission. And then finally, we were able to start the educational programming, and the thousands of young people who learned about her history, who learned about not only maritime history, but also Cape Verde history and the history of the voyages of the ship. And also it's a major educational platform for math, for cultural studies, for a whole range of other things, which you know even better than I. And the National Park Service has always been a great partner, and having the availability of not only the space to meet, but also people that we knew were really interested in keeping the momentum going.
No, that's all great stuff. And that's why I wanted to interview you because both you and Julius were involved early on,
Right.
but capturing that history so it's people can understand it. Like I'm really happy you mentioned Tom Lopes because I think a lot of people may have forgotten about him.
Right.
And I remember when I first moved to this area, seeing his newspaper and looking at
Yes.
the fact that he was looking at it through an African diaspora
Right.
light. And so he had everything in there, and it was just always good to read. And I definitely miss having that around and having him around to
Right.
do that. And he would probably be so happy at what's happened to the Ernestina today.
Yes, and I think he would also be kind of anxious about the continuation and the involvement of not only the city, but also for more and more people to know about her and get to know her. By the way, you have a copy of the video that he did, right? Mystery
I
Lady?
I don't think so. I don't think we have a copy of that.
Oh my goodness. I was sure you had a copy. Anyway, I will send you a copy, Jan, because you definitely should see that. Um,
And I don't know who the copyright is, but I'm sure I would be interested in putting that on our website. You know, it's like
I think
it
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 may be on the
okay.
C. I'm not sure. I'm not
Okay.
sure. We'd have to check with Mary Ann. It may not be actually. But anyway, I will send you a copy because I just recently had a friend of mine make several uh, copies, and I was just trying to play. Something was going crazy with my computer um, player, the CD or DVD player, but I will send you a copy,
Okay,
and
great.
because he did just a wonderful job. Now he didn't go over. He sent Alberto from Providence. Um, can't remember his last name. Who did the narrative, interviewing people there and then interviewing people when the ship got here. But the footage is wonderful. And then he also included music from the Tavares,
Oh, okay.
the Mystery Lady. That's the name of the CD. The video is Mystery
Okay.
Lady. He did a really, it was, I play it every once in a while, and it it's good,
Yeah.
and there was footage here when she came to Newport and then in New Bedford when she arrived, and hundreds and hundreds of people on the dock, and people like Mary Barbosa and um, July and all of those people. It's a wonderful historic. It actually is a historic piece. I
Hmm.
forgot to mention that in terms of my own relationship, I was part of the first group of Cape Verdean Americans invited by Cabo Verde after the independence in 1981 to go to Cabo Verde. This was organized by, again, the late Raymond Almeida, who was then attaché at the U.S. Embassy.
That's Raymond Almeida, right?
Raymond
Okay.
Almeida.
It came up
Yes,
as Roman.
yes, yes. Again, he's no longer with us. It's a lot of too many people. Um, So on that trip, which was made up of about, there were two groups, and the first group, I was in the first group, which was made up of about 20 people, including Mary, and her husband, Barbosa, and Antonia Cicada, who was very important in the Connecticut Friends of Ernestina. She's no longer with us either. So in that trip, which was that was fabulous. That was the first time I had been to Cabo Verde. And Raymond had organized the trip so that just about every one of us was able to go to the island where our family was from. And my family's from Brava. So I was able to go to visit Brava. We all did. The only place we didn't go as a group was Santo Antone, but the one on the trip, John Santos from Providence, that's where his family was from, and he was able to make a trip there. So when we went to Mindelo in San Vicente, that's when I actually saw the Ernestina and met some of the people who were, overseeing the wonderful work, and met some of the workers who were involved with the ship. As a matter of fact, I was looking, you have a copy of this, right?
I think so. I haven't seen it in the,
Yeah.
hold up the front again. Like,
Actually,
oh, no, I don't think
this
so.
is one of the early copies. It's not brown anymore. It's white.
Yeah.
The
Okay.
cover is white. But I was just looking at that this morning, and there's a picture of me with the some of the workers on board who were working on the ship at the time. There are a number of other pictures, by the way, that, oh, in the center of the
Okay.
book. Um, and I'm just looking at Andrew Young and Pete Seeger, and I mean, there were just so many people we were able to meet some of the people who had been very much a part of the Effie Morrissey history, and some who had been part of the Bartlett Boys and gone on that, trip to the Arctic, who were still around, and they became very much a part. Austin Colgate and Fred Littleton and a number of other people who became a part of this support group. Anyway, I did see the Ernestina at that time and met some of the people, Eugenia Lopes, who came over on the ship, who had been living on the ship for a while. So that was a very, in addition to my going, of course, to the village and to the house that my father had actually been born in, and was no longer owned by the family, but his sister, my aunt, had come over in the 60s, and she had still been living there. So that was a wonderful trip, and I've been to Cabo Verde twice since then, which is great. The last time in 2013, which was with my two nieces and a nephew, and their friends. That was organized. I don't know if you know, in New Bedford, Helen. Anyway, my oldest niece, was a very good friend of a young woman that she'd grown up with in Providence, whose uncle wanted to send her to Cabo Verde. So she invited, and he wanted to send her and my niece and another cousin. And so my niece asked me, don't you want to come? And I said, well, I'm not sure, because if I went, I wanted to, to do something. But then I said, why not? So in fact, her uncle sponsored about half the group, and then I sponsored and another niece, two other nieces, and a nephew who I knew would never make the trip, because of their having families, etc. So, and then the stories about the actual trip, the book by Stefan Platzer, right?
No, I haven't seen that book. I have to admit I haven't read that many books about it, but I did hear about the Phoenix of the Seas. So
The
I'm going to read
Phoenix of
that
the
one.
Seas was okay. He did a wonderful job. But Stefan's book is about the trip itself, the voyage. He did almost daily letters and communications to his wife in Massachusetts. And then he published this book. So you definitely should. I'll give you his number. You should definitely have a copy of that. Um, and he was I think he was the radio operator. So he kept us in touch every single day. I would go to um, I would be in touch with Joe Rose, who was on the commission in Marion, and he had a two-way radio, which in his basement. So I would be in touch with him, and he would be in touch with Stefan just about every day. It was really quite something, like 41 days. Um, and then, of course, when she ran into this, whether it was the wake of this tanker that went by very close, too close, whether that was it that stopped the ship the Ernestina being able to move, so they would be calmed for like a few days, and then came on. And then when she was arriving, there was a great storm that night. And I remember waking up in the middle of the night and wondering what was happening. So Ernestina continued to have these stories, which I think all maritime people understand. My late brother loved the Ernestina, and he died before she was able to get back from Maine, but he was a merchant seaman and then a Navy person and then a merchant seaman again. So he and his friends in New Bedford, the Bisca Club, the Exxon Group, they would hire to go out on the ship, and of course they had the music and everything else that was. So the Ernestina she's special. I mean, there's no question about it. Go ahead.
So I'm going to ask you, what do you see in the future for Ernestina?
Well, my hope is that it will continue to be the unique educational platform that she can be. And I think there's so many other things that could be done now. And in addition to all of that has been done since she was certified in New Bedford, and the kind of trips that she made along the seacoast and up to the Erie Canal, whatever, and the trips with the school children, which I think is so important. I am hoping that the Mass Maritime Academy, the fact that the plan is for her to be there for the academic year so that she's used for the cadets. One of the hopes for our doing that was that the academy itself would be able to attract and recruit students of color, more students of color, and most of the people, they recognize that too, because they recognize that their own student population is not diverse at all, or I don't know how diverse, but it's certainly not, I wouldn't call it very diverse. And I'm hoping that the public funding will continue to support it. And I'm also hoping that more and more of the younger generations, especially in New Bedford, because that is that was the home port when she came, and part of the agreement was that she would be the home port for summer and be used for those kind of educational purposes, working with the schools, working with other institutions, etc. But that is, I shouldn't say but, and that's going to require an ongoing support, not only of the city of New Bedford and other private groups like foundations and other organizations, but also the public. And the one of the things that I think is challenging is that because of this history, which is like has been stop and start again kind of thing, is that the younger generations in New Bedford, for example, of Cape Verdeans, Cape Verdean Americans, other people of color, etc., is not yet, I don't think, connected. And some of the older generations, like myself or the next one, haven't really been able to transfer or bring that like up to date. And I think that's a big challenge. And I think, yeah, I know that SEMA is, that's something that they have always had to work on. And the further we get away from the active history, like in the 80s and the 90s, I think the harder it is to keep churning that up, like the waters, like the ocean, to keep moving. You get new waters replacing the old, and the old goes out. So I think that's a challenge, but that's my hope. She has so much potential. I mean, just looking at the updated the camera views of her right now, I mean, she looks beautiful. I mean, there's a story that I just saw in this book. It's on page 34. It's written toward the end of we just had some comments from different people we were able to get. And this one, I don't know who this is, but his name is Frank Way from Rutherford, New Jersey. And he has this long story that about 24 years ago, he was stationed on a ship, USS Acadia A, a destroyer based in Newport. And they were coming into Narragansett Bay, and they happened to bump into this ship that had apparently run aground. And I guess there was a storm or something. So, they saw a red light from the ship. It turned out it was a lantern covered with somebody's old jacket or something. But anyway, they were invited to go aboard the ship, and he was just surprised. There were people, there were animals, there were chickens, there was boxes and all kinds of things. And he couldn't, kerosene lamps, and I mean, he couldn't figure out what this was. I guess they told him what it was, and they were there for a while, and so they notified the Coast Guard. It's not clear whether the Coast Guard came, but they took off, and then they saw that Ernestina was no longer there. He couldn't figure out how they had made it out, because of course, as he said, those of us who felt radar, sonar, LORAN, gyro repeaters, etc., are essential for ocean travel. The crew of the Ernestina personified the old adage, wooden ships and iron men. I thought this was a wonderful story, because they had to come over without an engine, and of course that's why it took 41 days. Because we couldn't figure out how to get the engine over there, you know. um, so the history and up to the present day involves so many different people of all colors, of all economic backgrounds, of all, academic backgrounds, of all ages, in different countries, and crossing boundaries. My hope is that kind of like coalition of people, of human will and human respect for our history, respect for, our ancestors of all shapes and sizes and colors. That she can continue to tell these stories. She has a lot of life left in her.
I have to admit that sounds great, and that's the thing I keep taking away from the more I know about Ernestina, that she is a vessel for everybody, and that's what I was telling Julius. She's a vessel for everybody, and we all can learn something from it. She's not just for any group. And I agree with what you said about that's a great maritime kind of analogy of the churning of waters, because it is a vessel. And I wonder about that kind of stuff too. Like, what do we lose when we don't keep the history in front of people? Right. That's the thing that made the pandemic so horrible for people, because it took us all out of that time continuum that was always moving forward. And now I think people do forget those kinds of things. And that's the deadly part, the part where you realize people's memories are not disappearing, but nobody's really talking about these things as much as they used to.
Right.
And you miss it. Because I know there have been people saying that it should be something that belongs in the Cape Verdean community. And yes, that's true, but that who's going to sponsor it? Who's going to finance all of it? It has to be for everyone to be able to finance it. Right. And the Ernestina Morrissey has to sail. So Mass Maritime.
It has to be an active ship.
It has to be active.
One of the things that when she came over in 1982, and the captain, Marco Nascimento Lopes, and Michael and I, we put our hands together, and that was our hope, that she continued to sail. There was never any Tom's vision, or any of the other people, was never any thought that she would become a museum ship someplace, just sitting. And although part of that, sitting like in New Bedford at the harbor so people can visit, get on and off, etc. But she has to be active. And she's a wooden ship. So I think,
right.
The deterioration when she's not active is a big, that's something that we don't want. So I am hoping, and still optimistic that because she is living, visible, not just a symbol, but she is history in action. I mean,
Right.
she's really.
I do admit when I brought the person who taped all those scenes, she interviewed almost all of the crew. So they actually hired a crew for the summer with Captain Tiffany because they went down to Galveston for a tall ship program, and they just came back from Gloucester for some races that they did there.
Right,
And
right.
one of the young women who's aboard the ship is a young woman of color. And I think she might be the only one who goes to Mass Maritime.
Yes, I
Uh,
think I met her when
she didn't
yeah,
want to be interviewed, but she was there for the
really.
summer.
She seemed very shy. I remember
Yeah,
talking
yeah.
to her. Yes, yeah. She's quite
So
young.
so just that alone, gives me hope. And I know there was another young man that we talked to, and I explained to him about federal positions, that there are some NPS parks that have vessels that need
Mhm.
work. And so I told him where to look and find out that information. So the crew wasn't that big. It's only about 5 or 6 people with Captain Tiffany they were hiring. So I'm assuming that they hire crew for the summer. And then
Mhm.
during the winter, the Ernestina Morris is at Mass Maritime.
Right, right. I mean, I think that there are a number of people who were very, I mean, there was all along the way, there was always controversy, always controversy of one kind or another. And that, that was one of the things. Well, why isn't she just in New Bedford? Or why Mass Maritime, et cetera? Um, and I think that it, I am glad that we have that an arrangement was made that the ship that she can be taken care of, because over the years there have been necessarily because we didn't have the money, there have been the deferred maintenance that was not good. And I think that the infrastructure to maintain her, not just the wooden ship, but also the active life is super important.
Yeah, I agree. Because without that, she would just kind of fall apart.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't want that either. And it's nice to be able to say that she provides that hands-on education that young sailors need to be able to go out into the ocean. Because now I'm thinking of all the people who are being trained to be captains of a wooden vessel. Like Captain Tiffany's the captain now. Like who's coming behind her to be the next captain? So these are the people who are doing that.
And also the education that can take place in the summer, for example, for young people. As you know, some of the teachers in the New Bedford area were just wonderful. And it wasn't just related to the maritime, but all their academic subjects and working together, which is super, super important, is a great thing that our young people have to learn, especially in this time of great, polarization and us against them. It, there's so much that the Ernestina can teach to
Hmm.
everyone,
I
everyone.
agree. Well, I'm going to thank you for the interview. I'm just going to stop the recording, but thank you for the interview. I
Yes.
really appreciate you taking the time to talk about your relationship with Ernestina Morrissey. And I think we're going to get a lot of good stuff out of this, and we'll
I hope
we'll
so.
edit it and make it work. And I'm going to stop the video right now.